What are the headwinds that are facing the Russian economy?
Thank you, Catherine, for the question. I would say the main headwinds are mostly external. External in the sense that we are in an era where global growth is pretty weak. In the advanced economies, global growth has been not that stellar. If you look at the US, even the EU, because of falling domestic demand and exports, and even though now there are some signs of revival in the US, the overall economy and the overall environment is still a bit bleak. I should also note that last year, global trade was at its lowest level ever since 2013. Then on top of that, you have the fall in oil prices that are affecting commodity exporters, and Russia is obviously no exception. Commodity importers have done rather well, with one exception, and that is China. And that's important for Russia because China is a big market for Russian mineral-based, resources-based exports. But as China is slowing down because it's reorienting itself from export-led growth to more domestic consumption, from manufacturing to services, that has an implication for Russia as well. So you put all these things together, slow growth or low growth in Russia's main trading partners, oil prices, even though they're trending upwards, they're not at the skyrocketing levels of $100 a barrel or so on and so forth. So, which means that Russia continues to face external headwinds.
There are some positive stats that you've highlighted. Banking profits have tripled, 5.5% unemployment. We'd love to see that in the EU. Stable balance of payments. This is a fairly good picture, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And one thing I should say that given where Russia was in 2013, 2014, when you had economic sanctions, when you had the oil price shock, and again, the global environment wasn't all that stellar, it's remarkable how Russia's been able to restore and maintain and sustain its macro stability. And you can see that in all these things that you mentioned, a stable balance of payments, stable banking sector, low unemployment. So these are all things that I think the government honestly should get credit for. In fact, the way it's dealt with the crisis is almost a textbook response in terms of floating its exchange rate, in terms of the emergency recapitalization of its banking sector, and as well as expenditure cuts in real terms, which have been painful for some, but in net overall terms, that was what was required. So we are in a rather good position, but there are some nuances and details that matter. So let's take unemployment. So unemployment is indeed at an enviable level of 5.5%. But the thing is, most of the adjustment in the labor market, when you have a recession, you expect to see a lot more firing of people and unemployment rates to go up subsequently. That hasn't happened in Russia because of a unique feature in Russia's labor market, which is when a shock happens, people don't tend to get laid off. They are more ready and willing to accept a cut in their wage income, in their wages. So that's how unemployment has been kept low. Now that may sound like a good thing, which it is because it preserves stability, the statistics look good, but it also in the medium to long term prevents labor from being reallocated from low productive sectors to high productive sectors. And that's very important for an economy's long-term prospects, because you want, in situations like this, labor to be deployed in its most productive use. So if labor is frozen in its own sector, then that's a bit of a barrier.
You have pointed out that Russia remains heavily dependent on commodities. So what can Russia do now to change this picture? What decisive action is needed?
Well, I would say it's pretty immense, because the diversification process in Russia advances slowly because of limited spare capacity, because of, as I mentioned, because of the labor issue of not having enough sufficient skilled labor in tradable sectors where you can have the most impact in terms of diversifying into non-oil, non-gas sectors. Now the trend is inching forward in the sense that we have some sectors as emerging sunshine sectors. If you look at chemicals, wood processing, metals and metal products, and in particular agriculture is one sector to keep an eye on. Agriculture grew at 1.5% or so in the first half of 2016. As you may know, Russia has now displaced the US as the world's largest wheat producer and exporter. So science and agriculture, at least in the short to medium term, are encouraging. So we'll have to wait and see, but a lot more needs to be done in terms of fully turning Russia into a diversified economy. And if you want, I can just mention a few things. These are mostly structural constraints in the sense that you have lack of competition in certain productive sectors of the economy that hold back investment and productivity gains. You have an aging society, which has implications for the way pensions are dealt with in Russia. So that's something that the government is rightfully concerned about, and that has productivity implications as well. And bolstering investor sentiments, continuing to reduce policy uncertainty. So these are just three factors that will be really helpful in terms of unblocking these medium to long-term constraints.
Can you say whether EU sanctions are having an impact on the Russian economy?
Well, the short answer to that is I'm sure they are at some level. More thoughtful answer would be it's really difficult to say to what extent, simply because the sanctions shock happened around the same time as the oil price shock. So these two were contemporaneous shocks, and methodologically it's very difficult to disentangle the effect of one over the other. But let me tell you this, the oil price shock clearly dwarfs any other shock that has hit the Russian economy, because the magnitude was so vast. So I guess this is a topic for researchers in the future. I'm sure there'll be plenty of good doctoral dissertations written on this topic.